that, I'd like to introduce Reverend John Udo-Okon and Pastor Felicia Udo-Okon. They are both the hosts and conveners this evening of Word of Life. Reverend John, as we all know, is he's the executive director of Word of Life International. He's a community outreach and development leader. He's done a lot of work in the society, in the community, and right there together with his wife, Reverend Felicia Udo-Okon, they have devoted themselves to working to fight hunger and poverty in New York City. And what we're here talking about today, the issue of land and housing for all, is something that they have taken on as well as individuals and also as an organization, as Word of Life. And that is why we're here today. So with that, I want to say much. I'd welcome Reverend John Udo-Okon.
COVID-19 was really the factor that made us to delve into this series of workshops. As many of you may have known, Word of Life was greatly impacted by the outbreak. Early this year, we had many of our staff members who contracted the virus, and we briefly shut down our food operation and other services in the month of April. And it was so serious that, we were left with no alternative, no other choice but to close down. We could not even have access to simple things like face mask. We made several efforts, reaching out to the various agencies and people that we knew that could help us, but there was not much help. And because of that breakdown, because of that crisis, we began to think of how can we as a community become more resilient? What can we do? And housing has also been a major crisis, because post-COVID, we'll be having a lot of evictions as a result of people not being able to pay their rent. And also we already have, a serious crisis now in which, community residents are not even able to afford the new buildings that are coming up.
Over 60,000 homeless individuals in New York City at any given moment. And it's far more than that. Those are just the city's reported numbers. So we need housing, absolutely. But what we don't need is the housing that they're building, which, like I said, 75% of it, none of us can afford to live in. And even the 25% they tell us we can afford to live in is more than most. It requires us to make more money than most of us do. On top of that, why are the only places that the city wants to build this housing that they're saying that we need in communities that have been disinvested, that have needed this money, and that are low-income Black and Brown communities? So, for example, in 2005, they rezoned Park Slope 4th Avenue. One side of 4th Avenue in Park Slope is white and wealthy. The other side was poor and Latinx, predominantly South and Central American folks. So the side that was the white and wealthy side was preserved and stayed the same, and they kept their brownstones and their small buildings. The side that was predominantly people of color was upzoned, and we saw a loss of 15,000 residents of color from that corridor after the rezoning. So the question is not, I don't argue that we need to build housing, absolutely. But why aren't we building housing in areas where people are white and wealthy? Why aren't we building housing everywhere? Why are we only saying we can build housing in communities that are low-income communities of color? And at the same time saying that the only way those communities can get resources is by taking an upzoning, which honestly makes no sense because the city didn't invest resources in our communities for the past 60 years. So what the city should be doing and what we're advocating for, and what we hope this bill is a step towards, is saying our communities need investment, period. There are other places that you can build your luxury condos, that you can build your housing, that have been invested for the past 60 years. So they can bear the burden and take on some of this weight, rather than building this housing in our communities that we can't even afford, and that's actually going to push us out. So it's not saying we do need rezonings, we do need more housing, but it's a question of they're not being honest about why they're putting the housing where they are.
The problem with this is that some of the developers, will buy private properties. And once they buy the private properties, they're able to maneuver themselves and put up whatever building they want to put up there, which is, more expensive for the residents to live in. And even sometimes when these developers come to the community boards, we kind of pressure them to maybe allow certain units in the building to be set aside for community residents. But they always find a way, because they know that, our residents will not be able to live in there. Either they don't have a perfect credit score, or they don't have the income. So there's always a way for them to deny our community residents of access to these buildings. So it's a challenge, and like the speaker said, we have to be better organized to push back. And we have to work closely with our elected officials.
The two phrases I've been hearing over and over and over again is being pushed out and then pushing back. So those are if we don't take anything out of here, let's take those two out of here. How can we avoid being pushed out? By pushing back. Now, let's take some questions for you, Alex. Are there any stories of success, whether in NYC or otherwise, where coalitions have successfully pushed back and achieved wins for housing justice? If so, can you share some examples?
Yeah, there are definitely examples. So I would say in New York, obviously, Councilmember Salamanca said no to the Southern Boulevard rezoning. And then as well in Williamsburg Bushwick and Williamsburg Greenpoint, there was a group of community groups that fought a lawsuit against a development that was going to be basically building housing only for one segment of the population, and was going to exclude all of the residents of Bed-Stuy, which is mostly Black. That project was stopped in 2008, and then fought for 10 years in court. But then eventually that project went back to the drawing board and was started over again in a more equitable way. And along the way, there were $2.4 million awarded to community groups for fair housing services and helping get people into those new apartments. Recently, I believe in Philadelphia, there was a group of homeless advocates and homeless individuals that had been fighting the city and squatting in buildings since COVID began, and they won from the city 50 buildings that they were going to be deeded over to them to be permanently affordable and put into what's called a community land trust, which means that the community owns the land and the buildings instead of developers. And then lastly, I would say just very recently, there was a significant victory in Sunset Park, where they wanted to make what was manufacturing industrial space, they wanted to convert it into commercial space. But really, they just wanted to take what could be active manufacturing with good paying jobs. They wanted to basically make it into office spaces and luxury retail in Sunset Park. And that also with 2 years of community pressure, eventually Council Member Menchaca said he was going to say no to that rezoning, and they withdrew their application. So we are seeing victories. They are hard fought and they are difficult, but then in other places like in Minneapolis and Seattle, they already perform some sort of racial impact study or racial analysis and land use changes, or they have a larger sort of comprehensive vision that addresses disparities throughout the city. So we're seeing a lot of opportunity and shifts and changes. I wouldn't say we're all the way there yet, but we're seeing this start to happen, and New York could definitely be a place and should be a place that leads the way on this rather than following behind other cities.
The other thing I have to say is that at the end of the day, we have to also find a way to improve the economic standing of our community residents. We can help them to improve their income either through employment, job training, whatever we can do. We have to work with our community residents to be able to afford to live in the South Bronx.